At 200 feet, Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker's bomber was already on fire. Below him lay open Romanian farmland, flat enough to attempt a belly landing. Ahead stood the oil refinery he had been ordered to destroy, and behind him, nearly 3 dozen B-24s were following his wings. If Baker turned toward the field, he might save the 10 men aboard Hell's Wench. But the formation behind him could lose its guide in the final minutes of the attack. So the burning bomber did not turn. It kept flying straight. The decision had begun hours earlier, before sunrise on August 1, 1943. Across dusty airfields near Benghazi, Libya, crews climbed into 177 B-24 Liberators for Operation Tidal Wave, a low-level strike against the oil refineries around Ploiești, Romania. The refineries fed a major share of the Axis war machine. They were also surrounded by one of the most heavily defended air zones in Europe. Heavy anti-aircraft guns covered the high approaches. Light cannon and machine gun positions were hidden near the ground. Barrage balloons hung steel cables above the industrial complex. German and Romanian fighters waited at nearby fields. The American plan was brutally simple. Instead of attacking from high altitude, the B-24s would cross the target at roughly 200 feet, low enough to slip beneath much of the heavy flak. But that placed the bombers inside the range of every light gun, rifle, and cannon along the route. A B-24 was built to cruise high above the earth. Down at treetop level, it was a 4-engine aluminum wall filled with fuel and bombs. One accurate burst could turn it into a furnace. Baker was 36 years old and commanded the 93rd Bombardment Group. His aircraft, Hell's Wench, would lead the group into the target area. In the right seat sat Major John Jerstad. Jerstad had already completed his combat tour. He had flown the required missions, earned his decorations, and had every right to leave the war behind. Instead, when he heard what the 93rd was preparing to do, he volunteered to return. He helped plan the mission. Then he chose the most exposed seat in the formation, the co-pilot's seat of the lead bomber. One man was responsible for taking the group in. The other did not have to be there at all. Together, they were about to lead men across more than 1,000 miles of hostile sky. The strike force left Libya under strict radio silence. 5 bomb groups formed a long column over the Mediterranean. No one could transmit unless absolutely necessary. The Germans monitored Allied radio traffic, and one careless message could erase the element of surprise. That silence became dangerous almost immediately. Over the sea, one of the aircraft carrying a key navigator suddenly fell from formation and crashed into the water. No warning, no recovery, no chance to replace the charts and calculations lost with it. The remaining bombers pressed north. Clouds over the mountains scattered the groups. Gaps opened. The neat columns stretched into separate waves. By the time the lead formations reached Romania, the mission was already coming apart. Near the final turning point, the lead group banked toward the wrong landmark. Instead of turning for Ploiești, it began heading toward Bucharest. Baker saw the mistake. The refinery smoke was visible in another direction. But under radio silence, there was no clean way to stop an entire formation once it had committed to the turn. He had seconds to choose. Follow the mission commander away from the target, or break formation and take the 93rd in alone. Baker turned toward Ploiești. Hell's Wench rolled north. The bombers of the 93rd followed. The move put them on an approach they had not rehearsed, from a direction they had not expected, without the protection of a perfectly timed mass attack. And the defenders were no longer surprised. Observation posts had seen the American aircraft. Gun crews were alert. Smoke generators were running. Fighters were beginning to climb. The 93rd descended over the Romanian plain until farms, roads, and rooftops flashed beneath them at terrifying speed. At that altitude, there was no horizon in the normal sense. There was only the next tree line, the next chimney, the next wire, the next gun. Then the first tracers rose. 20mm fire cut across the formation in flat, bright lines. Rounds tore holes through wings and fuselages. Aircraft behind Baker began taking hits. Some lost engines. Some trailed smoke. There was no room to dive away. No altitude to trade for speed. No space to recover from a hard roll. The only path was forward. 3 miles from the Columbia Aquila refinery, a large caliber shell struck Hell's Wench. The bomber shuddered. Fuel lines ruptured. Fire spread through the aircraft. Flames appeared behind the cockpit and streamed along the fuselage. The heat began eating into cables, hydraulics, and control surfaces. Baker and Jerstad could see the burning airplane around them. They could also see the farmland below. It was open, level, survivable, at least compared with the refinery ahead. The official citation later made the choice plain. Baker ignored terrain suitable for a safe landing because turning away could break up the lead formation. Nearly 3 dozen bombers were still using Hell's Wench as their reference point. At 200 feet under fire on an unfamiliar approach, The lead aircraft was more than another bomber. It was the formation's compass, and now that compass was burning. Baker held course. Jerstad stayed on the controls beside him. The fire grew. Smoke filled the fuselage. The bombs remained in the bay. The refinery expanded across the windshield. Storage tanks, towers, pipes, and chimneys wrapped in smoke. Every second brought the flames closer to the fuel tanks and the bomb load. Every second also brought the 93rd closer to release. There was no speech recorded from the cockpit. No final sentence survived, only the movement of the aircraft. Straight ahead, still level, still leading. At the release point, the bombs fell from Hell's Wench. The aircraft lurched as the weight left the bomb bay. Seconds later, the weapons struck the refinery area. Only then did Baker pull away from the formation. But he did not point the bomber toward escape. He pulled the nose up. At 200 feet, the crew in the rear had almost no chance to use parachutes. Baker and Jerstad tried to climb high enough to give them one. The damaged B-24 fought upward while fire consumed it from inside. 250 feet, then higher. The engine still pulled, but the bomber was losing speed. A B-24 that slow, that heavy, and that badly damaged could not climb for long. Baker and Jerstad stayed in the cockpit because someone had to hold the aircraft steady. Someone had to keep the wings level while the men behind them tried to reach an exit. The nose rose, the airspeed fell, then one wing dropped. Hell's Wench rolled out of control, narrowly missing another bomber in the formation. It struck the ground near the refinery and exploded. All 10 men aboard were killed. Addison Baker was 36. John Jerstad was 25. Jerstad had completed his tour and volunteered to come back. Baker had been offered a field where he might land. Neither man took the way out. The 93rd kept moving. The surviving B-24s crossed the refinery and released their bombs through fire, smoke, cables, and gunfire. 11 aircraft from Baker's group were lost over the target area. Then the later formations arrived. They flew into a battlefield already covered in smoke from burning oil and exploding storage tanks. Some crews could barely identify their assigned refineries. Some emerged with scorched paint. Others never emerged at all. 5 American airmen earned the Medal of Honor for actions during Operation Tidal Wave, more than for any other single American air action. 3 awards were posthumous. Baker and Jerstad were among them. But courage did not make the mission a clean victory. More than 50 B-24s were lost. Only 88 returned to Libya, and most of those carried battle damage. Hundreds of airmen were killed, missing, captured, or interned. The date became known as Black Sunday. The refineries burned, but the strategic result was temporary. Repair crews restored enough production that the raid failed to deliver the permanent blow Allied planners had hoped for. That is what makes the story harder and more honest. The men did not die inside a simple victory. They died inside a mission where extraordinary courage could not overcome every error, every gun, every mile, or every calculation. Jerstad received the Medal of Honor within months. His citation emphasized that he had volunteered for a mission he was not required to fly, then refused to abandon the attack after Hell's Wench caught fire. Baker's Medal of Honor followed in 1944. It recognized the decision to keep leading his group, bomb the target, and then climb in a final attempt to save his crew. But Baker himself was missing. The crash and fire had made identification impossible with the methods available after the war. His name was placed on the tablets of the missing at the Florence American Cemetery in Italy. For decades, that was where his story ended. A name carved in stone, a commander with no known grave. Then modern forensic work reopened the case. Unknown remains connected to the Ploiesti raid were examined again. Family DNA was compared with fragments recovered from the dead. In April 2022, 79 years after Hell's Wench fell, Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker was identified. That September, he was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. The mission had asked him to lead men to a target. The fire had asked him whether leadership ended when survival became possible. For 3 minutes over Romania, a burning airplane became a compass, and 79 years later, it finally pointed Addison Baker home.